Greetings, everybody. I got to say, big shout outs to this incredible team. Thank you so much. You're amazing. Love you all. We're pretty stoked, pretty excited. Yesterday was an opportunity for us to share our message to Canadians. You do not have to choose between two parties that are arguing about who's worse. Like I said last night, a pretty legitimate question to wonder who is worse. But you're not stuck with those two choices. We put to Canadians, you have another choice. Better is possible. But if you want that, you've got to vote for it. So we put to Canadians, we've already seen the approach of Mr. Trudeau. He's already started cutting the help that people need. That's the option. That's the playbook for the Liberals and the Conservatives. Either they cut help to people or they put the taxes up on the very same people that have struggled. We are the only party that has a clear third option. We're saying we're not going to cut the help you need. We're not going to put the burden back on you. We're going to offer a third option, which is to make the billionaires start paying their fair share. We believe the 44 wealthiest Canadians, the wealthiest billionaires who increased their wealth by $78 billion have to start paying their fair share. We think companies like Amazon need to start paying their fair share so we can invest that back into people, making sure people have the housing that's affordable. They can actually buy a home that's in their budget. Make sure our healthcare system works for people with pharmacare and dental care and mental health services. And make sure we fight this climate crisis like we actually want to win because we have to. That's the choice that Canadians have. They can't afford another 4 more years of Mr. Trudeau. We're putting to people, if you want childcare, the best way to get it is to vote for New Democrat. If you want pharmacare, the best way to get it, vote for New Democrats. If you want to tackle the housing crisis, the best way to get it is to vote New Democrat. We are here for you. We will always be here for you. Mes amis, je suis tellement heureux. Hier soir, j'ai eu l'occasion, l'opportunité de montrer notre plan. Et on a montré aux Canadiens que vous ne devez pas choisir entre M. Trudeau et M. O'Toole. Les deux vont faire ce qu'ils ont déjà fait dans le passé. Les gouvernements libéraux et conservateurs ont toujours choisi entre deux choix. Soit ils ont coupé les dos aux gens ou mettre plus de pression sur les épaules des travailleurs. On offre une troisième option. Option de faire payer le juste part des ultra-riches. Des compagnies comme Amazon qui paient virtuellement aucune taxe au Canada, on peut s'assurer qu'ils payent le juste part. On peut s'assurer que les 44 milliardaires les plus riches au Canada, qui ont gagné 78 milliards de dollars de plus pendant ces pandémies, qu'ils payent le juste part pour investir dans les solutions que les gens ont besoin. Ça veut dire la science médicaments universelle et entièrement publique. Ça veut dire soins dentaires. Ça veut dire qu'on peut faire face à la crise climatique en créant des bons emplois. Et aussi, on peut faire face à la crise du logement en investissant dans le logement abordable et sociaux. On peut le faire, mais vous ne pouvez pas se permettre 4 ans de plus de M. Trudeau, parce que quand il brise ses promesses, les gens payent le prix. On a une option alternative et on a la chance de la partager hier soir. Je suis fier de ça. Encore, je vous encourage, si vous voulez faire un choix différent, vous devez voter différemment. Ça veut dire voter NPD. Merci beaucoup. Je suis tellement fier d'être ici. And with that, I'm ready for any questions you might have.
First question, Karina Roman from CBC News.
Oh, hey.
Hi there. The decision when to raise the Canadian flags on federal buildings that have been lowered for residential school students is up to the Prime Minister. When do you think it's appropriate to raise the flags, and how would you come to that decision?
Well, I absolutely agree that there is a symbolic power in lowering the flags. What I really want to see is that every single one of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to actions are implemented. I want to see that every single child is brought home. I want to see a real commitment to working with Indigenous people, to support them in the search for other potential unmarked grave sites and in the trauma that this discovery and these discoveries are causing, the re-traumatization for a lot of survivors and families of survivors. So what I want to see is justice. And while it is important to grieve, I believe the federal government has a responsibility to walk the path of justice. And that's what I'm committed to. And that's what I want to see happen.
And how seriously can Canadians assess you and your platform when just a little over a week from Election Day, with advance polls opening today, you still do not have a costed platform out?
Well, we've talked about our plans for the past number of years, and we've laid out what we would do. Canadians know we have been firmly in favor of universal pharmacare for all. It's something that we campaigned on in 2019. That doesn't change because people still need it, and because Mr. Trudeau hasn't done it. So people know where we stand on that. We've always believed that our public healthcare system should be expanded. We've always believed that dental care should be a part of our healthcare system, and we've been campaigning on that for the past 2 years. So Canadians know where we stand. And we've been really clear on how we're going to pay for this. From the beginning, we've said we would make the billionaires pay their fair share. We would close the loopholes and offshore tax havens, which mean companies here in Canada, wealthy corporations, make billions of dollars of profit and then hide that in offshore tax havens and don't pay their fair share. Everyday folks go to work, punch in, punch out their clock, and they pay their fair share. Why is it that billionaires don't? Why is it that wealthy corporations don't? People don't feel good about that. They feel that's wrong, that's a rigged system, and we're going to end it. And by doing that, we're going to be able to invest more into people. So we've been really clear every step of the way. We're not going to cut services to people. We're not going to put more pressure on their shoulders. We're going to make billionaires pay their fair share. The other parties haven't been really clear with you. When they promise a tax credit or when they promise to invest in something, they haven't been clear how they're going to pay for it. And they've already showed, Mr. Trudeau's already showed you what he's going to do. He has already cut the help that people need. It's not a hypothetical anymore. I've said he's going to do this, and he did exactly that. He has cut the CRE by $800 a month. It's clear Mr. Trudeau is following the same playbook where he's going to cut help to people, and he's going to increase the burden on their shoulders. We're the only party that you can trust when it comes to not putting the pressure on you and your families, but making the billionaires pay their fair share to solve the problems that you're going through. You can trust us.
Next question, Annie Bergeron-Oliver from CTV News.
I'm just going to follow up on that a little bit.
Yeah.
You were the first party to release your platform. You did it about a week before Election Day. We now are 11 days out. What was the decision about not releasing a costed platform until now? Was there a complication with the PBO? What was it?
Well, we've been working with the PBO, and it certainly does take time. And we thought that was very important. The PBO is obviously very respected, and they've got a great track record of being able to cost out platforms. So we wanted to work with them, and we'll have our platform costed, released on Saturday.
And there are 11 days left in this campaign. It's been a long one so far. You're still hovering around 20% in the polls, although it does show some momentum. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about your strategy over this final 11 days, how you intend, where you're going, a little bit about the strategy to try to get voters to go for you and not the other parties.
We're going to keep on putting the option to Canadians. We're going to put the choice to Canadians. First off, we're going to show Canadians when times are tough in this pandemic, we were the ones that fought for you. We fought to double serve. We fought to increase the wage subsidy. We fought to bring in paid sick leave, and we fought to get help to students. We were there for you in the pandemic, and we are going to be there for you on the way out of it. And we are the only ones saying really clearly, there's a choice here. And Canadians are legitimately curious. They want to know. They're worried, in fact, more than curious. They're worried. Who's going to pay the price of this pandemic? Who's going to pay the cost of this? They are worried because they don't want the burden to fall on them. They don't want to see the services they need cut. We are saying to Canadians, you do not have to choose between either old party that's going to cut help to you or put the burden back on your shoulders. We've got a real clear alternative to tax the super wealthy, the ultra rich, those at the very, very, very top. They need to pay their fair share, and we can invest that back into people. That's a real option. We're going to put that to Canadians. We're going to let them know, if you want dental care, we're the ones that'll make it happen. If you want childcare, we've been always committed to this, and we will continue to fight for this with everything we have. If you want us to fight the climate crisis, New Democrats are the ones that are going to make that happen while protecting jobs and supporting workers. So for all the things that people need, for the crises they're going through, we are the solution to make life better, and it's your choice. And we're going to put that choice to Canadians.
En français, s'il te plaît.
Ce qu'on va faire, c'est de encore montrer le choix. Dans cette élection, vous avez un choix. Les autres partis vont dire non, vous n'avez pas un choix. C'est faux, vous avez un choix. Un choix entre les vieux partis qui vont faire l'exacte même approche qu'ils ont déjà pris dans le passé. Ça veut dire une approche de couper l'aide aux gens ou de mettre plus de pression sur les épaules. On est le seul parti avec un autre plan, une troisième option. On dit clairement qu'on veut faire payer le juste part des ultra riches, des milliardaires, les gens qui ont eu une partie gratuite depuis longtemps à cause des partis conservateurs et libéraux. On va dire, c'est eux qui doivent payer le prix et on va investir pour régler les problèmes dans votre vie, pour régler la crise du logement, pour faire face à la crise climatique, pour investir dans nos soins de santé, pour une assurance médicaments universelle, pour les soins dentaires. C'est nous, les néo-démocrates, qui vont livrer la marchandise. Vous pouvez croire en nous.
Next question, Menaka Raman Wilms from the Globe and Mail.
Hello, Mr. Singh.
Hey.
You've talked a lot about how your party will help focus on Indigenous communities. I want to ask you about the lack of legislative framework to help prevent fire-related deaths on reserves in Canada. It comes down to the fact that provincial laws do not apply on reserve because of the Federal Indian Act. Is it acceptable that everywhere else in Canada is subject to enforceable fire and building codes, but that's not the case on reserves? And in 2021, should Indigenous Services Canada have a record of the number of people who've died on reserve due to fire, a number they say they don't have right now because First Nations are not required to provide those numbers?
I really appreciate the question. It really highlights the crisis in housing in Indigenous communities. And I've seen that crisis up close. I've met with people in Saskatchewan and Ishkandiga and in communities like Gracinero, where we've seen up close and personal the struggles that they're dealing with when it comes to housing and how it is the federal government's responsibility to fix that problem. And we are committed to that. But your specific question around being prepared for fires and the fact that fire-related deaths are so common because of a lack of infrastructure, it is a part of the reason why we've got to tackle the housing crisis. That means good quality housing that's safe, that's well built, that's up to code. And I believe the federal government does have responsibility to ensure that the buildings that are being erected, that are being built, that are being invested in have to meet good standards. They have to be safe. They have to be proper for people to live in. They have to give people a dignified life, and they have to be safe. And so we absolutely believe that should be something the federal government does.
As a follow-up, can you point to specific parts of your platform that would specifically help with this issue of fire on reserves?
Well, we've said that we need a housing strategy that is for Indigenous people, by Indigenous people. And in doing that, we would work with Indigenous communities to outline and to lay out what needs to be done. Indigenous communities have the solutions. A lot of communities are saying we've been pushing for solutions for so long, but it's been an Ottawa knows best approach, a top-down approach. We'd be collaborative, we'd work with communities. Communities on the ground know what they need and know the problems, and we work with them to solve them.
Prochaine question, Jean-Sébastien Cloutier de Radio-Canada.
Bonjour, M. Singh.
Bonjour.
J'aimerais revenir sur la soirée d'hier soir. M. Blanchet en est sorti frustré, a dit qu'il y avait eu énormément d'insultes envers les Québécois pendant la soirée. Il n'a pas aimé particulièrement la première question de l'animatrice qui laissait entendre que le projet de loi sur la laïcité et sur la réforme de la langue française sont des lois discriminatoires. J'aimerais vous entendre là-dessus, parce que vous n'avez pas parlé de ça hier.
Je veux dire clairement, l'idée que le racisme systémique ou la discrimination systémique existe dans une province ou un territoire est faux. Et ça fait mal ou ça nuit à la bataille contre cette sorte de discrimination. Parce que le racisme systémique et la discrimination systémique existent à travers le pays, dans chaque province et chaque territoire. Et c'est important de reconnaître, si on veut vraiment changer les choses, on ne peut pas penser que ça existe seulement dans une région, un quartier, une province, un territoire. Ça existe partout et on a le besoin de travailler ensemble pour éliminer ces discriminations à travers le pays. Donc ça, c'est tellement important de dire. I think it's really important to point out that if anyone thinks that systemic racism or systemic discrimination is isolated to one province or territory, first of all, that's wrong. And second, that hurts the fight against those forms of discrimination. We've got to acknowledge that this exists everywhere, across the country. One of the biggest examples is Indigenous communities do not have clean drinking water. That is a horrible example of how serious systemic discrimination is. That would never happen in a city like today, we're here in Ottawa. That's an example of the systemic discrimination that's going on, the systemic racism that's going on, and that exists across Canada. So we've got to be very clear. This is not a problem of any one province or territory. It exists everywhere in Canada. And to tackle it, we've got to acknowledge that it's everywhere and work together towards eradicating it.
En sous-question, vous avez sûrement vu que le premier ministre François Legault, hier, laissait entendre qu'un gouvernement minoritaire conservateur serait peut-être la meilleure solution pour le Québec, en disant se méfier des partis comme le NPD qui étaient trop centralisateurs. Vous avez réagi comment en lisant ça?
Je n'accepte pas cette critique parce que quand les Québécois et Québécoises ont eu besoin d'aide, c'était nous, les néo-démocrates, qui ont livré la marchandise. Quand les gens ont eu difficulté à rejoindre les deux bouts à cause de la pandémie, les autres partis d'opposition étaient absents et M. Trudeau a voulu faire le minimum, le strict minimum. Il a commencé la subvention salariale à 10%. Et on sait, à 10%, ce n'était pas suffisant pour aider les gens de garder leurs emplois. C'était nous qui avons forcé le gouvernement de l'augmenter jusqu'à 75%. C'était nous qui l'avons fait. Quand les Québécois et Québécoises ont eu besoin d'aide directe financière, c'était nous qui avons doublé la PCU. 1,8 million de Québécois et Québécoises ont reçu la PCU et ils ont reçu 1 000 $ de plus à cause de nos efforts. On est fiers de ça. Donc, dans les temps difficiles, quand les autres gens pensent qu'on doit rester les bras croisés, moi, j'ai jamais fait ça. Je peux jamais rester les bras croisés quand je vois les gens qui souffrent. Ma priorité, c'est toujours de trouver une façon d'aider. Et avec nos propos, ça va aider les gens au Québec. Une assurance médicament universelle, ce n'est une question de centraliser, c'est une question d'aider les gens de réduire les coûts. L'idée de faire face à la crise climatique, encore, c'est une bataille qu'on doit faire ensemble. L'idée d'investir dans nos soins de santé, de faire face à la crise du logement, tous ces problèmes sont des problèmes au Québec et d'ailleurs, à travers le pays. Et c'est important qu'on travaille ensemble pour les régler.
Next question, Manamidi from the Canadian Press.
Hey, Mr. Singh, good morning.
Hey,
Mr.
morning.
Blanchet last night pivoted the question on discrimination against Indigenous peoples to talk about Quebec and suggesting that Quebec is also facing similar kind of discrimination. Do you agree with this suggestion? And I also like to hear your general thoughts on why do you think the issue of systemic racism, the issue that's been on almost everybody's mind during the pandemic, has been almost absent during the campaign?
I'll start with systemic discrimination and systemic racism. It is a problem. People live it every day, and we see the results of that systemic discrimination and that systemic racism in the death of Joyce Szechuan, who should never have lost her life, who was pleading for help, and we saw directly the pain and the impact of systemic racism. People lose their lives. We've seen it in police violence, where racialized people who had mental health or health concerns ended up losing their lives. We know that this is a problem that exists and it needs to be fixed, and we are committed to fixing it. While I would not equate right now the systemic injustice that Indigenous people are facing with other communities, I wouldn't make an equivalence. So I don't agree with that portion. But it is true to say that Francophones across Canada face systemic discrimination because of the language they speak. They can't access services in their language. They can't access education in their language. That's a real challenge. And in Quebec, it wasn't very long ago that people in Quebec were the victims of systemic discrimination because of their language. That's true. That is a reality of Canada as well. And so that's true. I just wouldn't make an equivalence between the injustice that faced by one community and another. But the fact that it exists is true.
En français, s'il te plaît.
Oh, c'est difficile en français de traduire tout ça. Non, je vais le faire. Je veux commencer en disant que le racisme systémique existe et on a vu les impacts directs dans les vies des gens. En particulier, un exemple fort, c'est Joyce Szechuan. Elle a perdu sa vie à cause de le racisme systémique. Et ça, c'est le taux de le racisme systémique. Les gens perdent leur vie. C'est pourquoi on doit faire face à cette sorte de discrimination. Et c'est pourquoi on veut le faire. Et l'autre question, ça touche la discrimination systémique que les Québécois et les Québécoises étaient victimes et les francophones étaient victimes. Je suis d'accord. Je ne fais pas un équivalent entre un groupe et un autre groupe. Les groupes ne font face aux mêmes défis, aux mêmes injustices. Donc, je ne fais pas une équivalence, mais je peux dire clairement que oui, les francophones ont subi de la discrimination systémique et les Québécois et Québécoises, ce n'était pas longtemps qu'ils ont aussi ils ont fait face à la discrimination systémique. Donc oui, ça existe et c'est un vrai enjeu.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. On a different topic, Statistics Canada will update today its job numbers. The employment rate last month was about 7.5%. What would you do if elected to bring this rate down? And why do you think Canada has one of the highest unemployment rates in the G7 group?
I really appreciate the question. I think there's a lot of things going on right now. I think we need to make sure that there's good jobs available with good pay. People want to work. People feel a lot of dignity in working. And so I don't buy the argument that conservatives try to push that, or liberals are also pushing that people are lazy or they don't want to work. I reject that altogether. People want to work, they want to contribute, but they want good jobs and they want good wages and they need good wages. And so what we're going to do to make it easier for people to work is to invest in creating those good jobs. And we know we can do that when we fight the climate crisis. We can create good jobs that help us reduce emissions. So that's one thing we want to do. We also know that a lot of workers are struggling because they do not have, the cost of living is so high and they're struggling because they don't have access to benefits. So to uplift the conditions of work, we're going to invest in universal programs like medication coverage for all, like dental care, mental health supports, so we can keep people healthy. And I think that's going to help as well. We need to invest in creating those good jobs with good wages so that people have good opportunities to build a life.
Next question, David Thurton from CBC News.
Hey, good morning, Mr. Singh. Good to see you.
Good morning.
I wanted to ask you about the Shaw-Rogers merger. Sorry, I wanted to ask you about the Shaw-Rogers merger. How would the NDP government handle a merger like that, or the proposal for a merger like that?
We would be opposed to it. We would be opposed to the merger. We're already faced with telecommunication giants that are, if I'm going to be straight up with you, exploiting people. We pay some of the highest rates for cell phones and internet services in the world. This type of merger would only make it worse, would only increase the monopoly, make things worse for people. I'm not going to let that happen. In fact, we can put a limit on the amount that credit card or that cell phone companies charge. We can put a limit on the amount that internet companies charge, and that's our plan. We would put in and we would mandate a limit on how much they can charge you. That is within our power to do federally. Conservatives and liberals have not done it because they are afraid or unwilling or both to take on these big telecom. We're not. We are going to take them on and make sure that you have affordable internet services, affordable cell phone services, and we're also going to make sure that we mandate mandatory unlimited plans, not the fake ones where once you hit a certain limit, your plan slows down so much that it's pretty much like you don't have access to data. That's not gonna, that's making life harder for people. And we know access to the internet, access to your cell phone is crucial, vital for work, for education, for accessing services. So this is not a luxury, this is a necessity, and we would treat it as one and make sure people can afford it.
Next question, Mackenzie Gray, CTV News.
Hi, Mr. Singh. Approximately 36% of the world has been vaccinated. Would you feel comfortable with Canada giving out third doses on a broad-based scale, considering there's so few people across the world who've been vaccinated?
This question is very important. It brings to mind the fact that we are in a global pandemic, and in a global pandemic, if the pandemic continues in any part of the world, it will affect all parts of the world. It really is one of those examples when we talk about how we're all connected, how I talk about, my mom taught me that we're all one, we truly are. If we're not dealing with this pandemic globally, we're all going to actually suffer the consequences. So we've got a responsibility morally to take care of people around the world, but also in terms of being prudent. It's the best way to tackle a global pandemic is to contribute in the fight globally. What we've been advocating for in terms of our approach was to make sure that we waive the patent protection for the vaccines so that countries that don't have the same economic capacity, that aren't as wealthy, are able to, who are not able to purchase the vaccine, are able to produce it locally. That's been their request. They've been saying, we want to produce it locally, but we can't because of the patent protection on vaccines. And what we would do is waive that patent protection on the vaccines so those countries could produce it locally. That's a more sustainable solution, so they could actually produce it locally and make sure their population gets vaccinated.
Respectfully, sir, you didn't answer the question there. Are you comfortable with
my approach.
Of course,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's a live issue right now, and it looks like NACI might be coming out with recommendations soon on what third doses should be. So would you be comfortable on a broad-based scale in Canada having third doses given out with many people in the developing world having no access to vaccines?
So I'm giving a different approach. I think the approach would be, instead of the concern about giving out doses, is that we give the means for countries that are not as well off to be able to produce the vaccine locally. I think that's the most effective way to make sure that we are doing our part, and that's what I would contribute. That's what I would be advocating for. I also believe that if we can contribute by providing doses to other countries, we should do our part as well. But the most sustainable solution, and what I've heard from advocates, is that we need to waive the patent protection, something that Mr. Trudeau has yet to do, something that President Biden has already committed that he is open to doing. We should be showing leadership and saying we would waive the vaccine patent protection so that countries can produce it locally. That's a more sustainable solution so that countries around the world can do their part to fight this pandemic.
This concludes our press conference. Thank you, merci.
Thanks so much. Thank you.